A massive disservice is done to the Australian people and indeed has contributed to the division created by this debate. When government talking points are being laundered as facts, despite there being clear agendas stated by the designers of the voice, and despite the government assurances being often flagrantly contradictory and incoherent. Many who have engaged with this proposal hoping to find a way to help the Indigenous Australians who most need assistance are left disappointed. They are left with the falsehoods, misleading information and promises that can't be kept and should never have been made. The voice is flawed in its foundations. It is built on lies and an aggressive attempt to fracture our nation's founding document and divide the country built upon it. Our most marginalised deserve better than this. They deserve the truth, the unvarnished, untainted, and yes, maybe unpalatable to some people, truth. The first lie that underpins the voice is that Indigenous Australians do not have a voice. We've been told by the Indigenous Minister for Indigenous Australians that Indigenous people do not get a say on policies or the decisions being made on our behalf. I am one of 11 Indigenous voices currently in Parliament, and I will not accept the lie, the rationalisation of many Indigenous voices of the Yes campaign who suggest our democratically elected voices are redundant because we belong to political parties. The patronising suggestion that we cannot focus our efforts on improving the lives of marginalised Aboriginal and Torres Strait Australians because we are simultaneously responsible for constituents of all backgrounds is unambiguously wrong and should be rejected resolutely. The claim that this is an invitation from Indigenous people to the rest of Australia is the second lie the voice is built upon. To say this has come from First Nations people plays into backwards, neo-colonial, racial stereotyping, suggesting that all Aboriginal people think the same, feel the same, and want for the same things. I wish I could spend this entire speech just listing inspiring Aboriginal Australians and their contributions to policy, government, our Australian way of life, and so many important issues. But I have to address the third lie that underpins the divisive voice. That is that it is simply just an advisory body. Nowhere in the question that will be put to Australians or in the proposed chapter on which we are voting do the words advice, advise, or advisory appear. If the Prime Minister truly intended for this body to be a simple advisory body, as he, his government, and the advocates of the voice repeatedly tell us, then it would have been stipulated in the proposed chapter. Instead, proposed Chapter 9, Section 129, Part 1 determines there shall be a body called the Voice, and Part 2 specifies that it shall have the power to make representations to the Parliament and executive government on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. You see, words matter. Words proposed for amendment within our nation's constitution matter a lot. And they matter to every single Australian. As Chris Merritt, legal affairs expert and Vice President of the Rule of Law Institute Australia, explained recently during a Voice forum, the difference is significant. Describing the Voice as an advisory group understates its significance and gives the misleading impression it would be a benign sounding board for ideas. That the voice will produce representations, not advice, suggests its role would be more like a lobby group that acts only in the interests of its clients, not the interests of the government, the parliament, or even the nation. It is the Prime Minister who has many times trotted out talking points that he wants us to focus on the question and only the question. But at the same time, the role he insists the voice will have is not in the question. This point is critical, and it leads to the fourth lie that the voice is built on. No matter what the government, the advocates and the activists say about what the voice will or won't do, the fact is they don't know. They don't know who will be on the voice. They don't know what it'll choose to make representations on. They don't know how a High Court will interpret the proposed new chapter. In front of friendly audiences where they aren't trying to pull the wool over the eyes of ordinary Australians, the people who are in the room with Anthony Albanese designing this make clear what they expect the voice to be. Militant unionist and key working group member Thomas Mayo told the Search Foundation's Snapshots of Communists in Australian History event on The Voice in March of 2021, "We understand as unionists that you don't make an agreement with the boss without building power first, without building representative structures any more than a communist party or any other political party can function without structure and elected representation. Australians, including Aboriginal Australians, have every right to be concerned that such radical demands are being made by advocates of the voice." So let's be very clear. The widespread community support of recognition of Indigenous Australians in the Constitution bears no relation to what the architects of the voice have put forward. This very obvious point was made by Amanda Vanstone in the appendix of the 2017 Uluru Council final report. I encourage you to go and read it. She pointed out that the voice proposal created a dissonance between what the public believed recognition meant and what has been proposed. She observed it could be very divisive and damaging to pursue this without properly working through that dissonance. Well, here we are, divided by a proposal that its own advocates are very clear is about being separate, not united. A massive disservice is done to the Australian people and indeed has contributed to the division created by this debate, when government talking points are being laundered as facts, despite there being clear agendas stated by the designers of the voice, and despite the government assurances being often flagrantly contradictory and incoherent.